When did niggers become Africans? This is the InSight. African, a term used as a collective identity for black people across the world, celebrated by many as the great unifier that symbolizes the shared history and destiny for people of African descent, criticized by some as a term that supposedly puts all peoples of Africa in one monolithic box, rejected by others who want nothing to do with the continent, preferring to be identified with nationalities such as Jamaican, or Bayesian, and even American, or British. As the month of Messiah approaches, celebrations of the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, the various campaigns around reparations, and even carnival bring the shared ancestry of African people in this country into focus. So for this insight, we're going to take a look at exactly how this term came to be used by black people worldwide and what they intended it to mean. It is the 1700s and the transatlantic enslavement period is at its peak. Black people were known as guineas, Negroes and niggers as the world began to be defined increasingly according to the criminality of European people. But the enslaved were always fighting for self-determination, as is demonstrated by the rebellion led by Chief Taichi in Jamaica, the revolution of Haiti, and the meticulously planned insurrection by Denmark Vesey in the Carolinas, USA, to name but a few acts of resistance. At this time, a man by the name of Ignatius Sancho is on the scene in Britain, believed to have been born on board an enslavement vessel traveling from Africa to the Americas in around 1729. He would eventually learn to read and write, becoming well known for his letter writing, which among other things called for the abolition of slavery. In his letters, he would refer to himself as an African, and importantly, would sign off with the pseudonym Afrikan. As a result, 2 years after his death, his letters were compiled into a book entitled The Letters of Ignatius Sancho, an African. Around the same time, on the other side of the Atlantic, Phyllis Wheatley became well renowned as another intelligent Negro for her ability to write poetry. In her poem, she used terms like Afrique to refer to her sable race, and became celebrated for her brilliance in spite of her conflictual relationship with her identity. Then came Otabo Kugwano and Olaudah Equiano, two black men once again on the London scene, who in the late 1700s formed the Sons of Africa, an organization that led the movement towards the abolition of the so-called slave trade in this country. Notably, once again, we see a shared connection with the continent as symbolic of the unity between those campaigning for freedom. From the late 1700s to the early 1800s, a number of organizations burst onto the scene throughout America and the Caribbean as black people fought for liberation and began to self-define in a world that had condemned them as slaves. In his 1963 essay, African Conscious Harlem, Richard B. Moore breaks it down. Quote, awareness of their heritage of culture and dignity continued during the colonial period and the early days of this republic. The name African was then preferred and used instead of the slave master's degrading epithet Negro. Witness thus the Free African Society, founded in Philadelphia. This was the forerunner to the African Protestant Episcopal Church of St. Thomas and also the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Note also the African Lodge of Prince Hall Masons in Boston, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, African Society for Mutual Aid, African Grove Playhouse in New York, and many so named throughout the country. As early as 1788, an organized body of AfroAmericans in Newport, which included Paul Coffey, who was soon to make history in this respect, wrote to the Free African Society of Philadelphia proposing a plan for immigration to Africa, unquote. It is worth highlighting that the American Revolution came to fruition in 1776, giving birth to a new identity, American. But when black men and women organized and self-defined in that environment, they called themselves African. And many took it even further. The Free African Lodge, led by Prince Hall, campaigned to the government in Massachusetts to be granted reparations in the form of everything necessary to be able to return to and make a way for themselves on the continent of Africa, their homeland. They wrote, signed, and sent a petition to the government in which they described themselves as, quote, a number of African blacks, unquote. But it's all good talking about black people in the diaspora, ShakaRa. What about those on the continent? Well, aside from the fact that a number of the people mentioned thus far were actually born on the continent, I got you. The names Edward Wilmot Blyden and Martin Delany are renowned as forerunners to black nationalism and Pan-Africanism as political ideologies and movements. Between 1885 and 1912, Blyden travelled through and lived in a number of African nations, promoting African unity and becoming a prolific writer. Delany, along with fellow organiser Robert Campbell, also travelled to the continent and actually signed a mutual agreement with a group of Yoruba chiefs. The contract began, quote, the king and chiefs on their part agreed to grant and assign unto the said commissioners on behalf of the African race in America the right and privilege of settling in common with the Egba people on any part of the territory belonging to Abeokuta not otherwise occupied, unquote. By this time, however, Europeans had colonial aspirations on the continent, which at the same time frustrated the implementation of this agreement and gave birth to a new generation of anti-colonial activists. One of them was James Africanus Horton. Born in Sierra Leone, Africanus was one of the early organizers against the European colonization of Africa. With essays such as The African's View of the Negro's Place in Nature and A Vindication of the African Race, Horton promoted not only African identity, but official African nationality. Other leading lights on the continent include J.E. Casely Hayford, Adelaide Casely Hayford, John Mensah Saba, Deuce Muhammad Ali, and Mojola Agbebi, a Baptist preacher from West Africa who founded the Native Baptist Church, the African Baptist Union of West Africa, and while speaking at the inauguration of the United Native African Church, Agbebi called for the formation of a church, quote, governed by Africans, worked by Africans, supported by Africans, minus the trammels, complexions, and dominations of a foreign and alien race, unquote. Jeez! Now I'm hitting you with a lot of information right now, but stay with me, because we're getting there. We're going somewhere with this. It is important to note that at this stage, we are in the late 1800s, hot on the heels of the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. This is the event during which European nations sat round a table and carved up Africa into many of the nations we see on the continent today, which means that African was a self-determined identity for African people long before there was any such thing as nationalities such as Nigerian, Ivorian, Kenyan, South African, etc. Simply because these countries never existed. There was no such thing as a Jamaican, a Trini, a St. Lucian, or a Bajan. But Africans on both sides of the Atlantic, whether enslaved in the Americas or members of indigenous nations that Europeans called tribes, began to knit their identities together as African. Moving on. In southern Africa, a movement known as Ethiopianism began to flourish in the form of the Ethiopian or African Church movement, in which Africans sought to separate from the religious institutions of invading colonizers and build institutions of our own to solve our own problems. Noted historian Hakeem Adi breaks it down like this, quote, Ethiopianism in South Africa, as well as elsewhere, was also clearly a manifestation of wider social and political unrest, and was associated with the slogan Africa for the Africans. Ethiopianism in South Africa was strengthened by the outbreak of the Second Boer War and subsequently considered a contributory factor to the 1906 Zulu or Bambata rebellion in Natal. This rebellion also led to one of the earliest Pan-Africanist texts, a defense of the Ethiopian movement written by Bandele Omoniyi, a young Nigerian student based in Britain who ended his short life engaged in politics in Brazil. Then came the powerful movement of the prophet Marcus Messiah Garvey, who organized at least 6 million black people worldwide under the name of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World. When explaining its purpose, he said, "We are determined to solve our own problems by redeeming our motherland Africa from the hands of alien exploiters and founding a government, a nation of our own, strong enough to lend protection to the members of the race scattered all over the world." Unquote. With the influence of Messiah, Ethiopianism would grow to find its greatest expression in the Rastafari movement, who most certainly projected the power, beauty and strength of an African identity. Fast forward to the independence movement on the African continent, in which the most revolutionary leaders, such as Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah and Papa Patrice Lumumba, sought to forge African unity with Africans across the world, which in turn inspired a man by the name of Omowale Malcolm X, who in founding the Organization of Afro-American Unity in 1965, wove the issue of African identity into their aims and objectives. Quote, "Our African relatives who are a majority in their own country have found it very difficult to gain independence from a minority. It is that much more difficult for Afro-Americans who are a minority away from the motherland and still oppressed by those who encourage the crushing of our African identity." Unquote. Importantly, for Omowale Malcolm X, Africanness was not just a matter of fact or historical or cultural origin, but a key factor in the capacity of black people to build organized political power in the world.
Most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States. But they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba and those in Brazil and those in Venezuela and those throughout the Caribbean and Haiti and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists and to colonialism as it exists in the West. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride, and as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together, and your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat, more threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat.
So, that was just a brief rundown of how black people around the world organized and projected an African identity and what they were looking to achieve in doing so. As last year's Football World Cup demonstrated, more and more of the younger generation of Africans in this country are identifying as British and even English in ways that would have been alien to previous generations. In recent years, we have seen the exponential worldwide growth of movements like the Black Hebrew Israelites, the Aboriginals, and now even American descendants of slavery. All different ideologies, different movements that promote different things, but they all have one thing in common: a total and express rejection of Africa and African identity. So today we are asking the question, what is it about the African identity that empowered generation after generation of the movements of our ancestors? What does an African identity mean in today's world, and what does it have to offer? If we reject the African identity today, are we losing the power that our ancestors developed and achieved so much with? Those are the questions, and this is the InSight. Peace and blessings, kings and queens. Just, prelude to the month of Messiah, we're breaking down, the history of the usage of this term African. Do you want to hear your thoughts? Do you want to hear your opinions? There's a lot of opinions around this term African and whether we should call ourselves African or not. Drop it all in the comment section. Do remember, if you have not already, subscribe to gotKushTV right about now. Hit the subscribe button, hit that bell, comment in the comment section, like the video, and very importantly, share it with a friend, a brethren or assistant who you think might get something from this little rundown right about here. You know what I'm saying? Depending on how the comment section goes, I might do a follow-up to this one next InSight, so check it out. I do want to hear your thoughts and views, and I might respond directly to your points in the following InSight, kings and queens. So I look forward to hearing from you. Do remember, you ain't got nothing if you ain't got Kush. Peace.
gotKushTV is supported by Better Marketing Mastery, the Hidden Science Academy, and Ancestral Voices.